Hello and welcome to this lecture. My name is Miracle Chibuzor Marcel, and I'm the founder and the director of the Pan-African Citizen Science E-Laboratory. So today we are going to be learning about the Chinese space station programs, the Tiangongs. Okay, the Chinese space station programs, because it's not just one space station program, there are many. Okay, there were smaller parts. So as a recap to my last lecture, in my last lecture, I talked about the International Space Station. I talked about the ISS modules, talked about the scientific studies done on the ISS and the ISS interiors. I talked about it. I also talked about ISS retirement and the future space station. So I talked about all of that, and I promised that I was going to talk about the Chinese space station program. So as a table of content, I'll introduce the Chinese space station, the Tiangong. I'll talk about the history of the Chinese space station program and the China's first and second space station, which are the Tiangong 1 and the Tiangong 2. I'll talk about the Tiangong 3, which is the third Chinese space station. I'll also talk about its model. I'll talk about some fascinating facts about Tiangong 3 and also talk about taikonauts, which are Chinese astronauts. I'll talk about the scientific research and experiment going on the Tiangong 3. Also talk about the interior of Tiangong 3, I mean the living and the working space for the taikonauts. I talk about the future expansion plan for Tiangong 3 and then the international cooperation and why Tiangong 3 matters. Then I'll do a conclusion and then you can ask your questions in the comment section. So, by the way, this lecture is sponsored by the FreeAstroScience, and they recently celebrated their sixth anniversary. Congratulations to them. Congratulations. It's been a very wonderful collaboration between us and Free Astroscience Group. So, introduction. The Chinese space station is China's permanently crewed space station orbiting Earth, just like the ISS belongs to the United States, it belongs to Russia. This is a shared apartment, the shared laboratory, sorry, between United States, Russia, and European and also and Japan. Okay, so the Chinese space station is China's permanently crewed space station orbiting Earth. It is officially known as the Tiangong Space Station. The Tiangong Space Station. Okay, Tiangong means heavenly palace. Okay, it means heavenly palace in China. So it serves as a laboratory for scientific research, technology testing, astronomy, medicine, and preparation for future missions to the moon and beyond. So the China became the third country in history after the Soviet Union and the America to independently develop their space flight technologies and their system, the capabilities. Okay, they are the third to independently do that. So let me talk about the history of how they started. Okay, so the real beginning of China's modern space station program came on 21st September 1992 when the government approved a project codenamed 921, okay, which became the foundation for four things. It became the foundation for China Human Spaceflight Program, it became the foundation for the astronaut corps, and also their Shenzhou spacecraft, and then the future space station development. I'm going to talk about all of this, okay? I'm going to talk about them in phases, okay? I'm going to talk about phase one, phase two, phase three, okay? So remember what I said, they started in 1992, okay? They approved this act the project 921, which contains these four foundations for their space station program. So I'm going to talk about it in three phases. So in the first one is the human space flight. So they achieved their human space flight ambition in 2003 when Yang Liwei became China's first astronaut aboard Shenzhou 5. It's a spacecraft, okay? That they sent a spacecraft. Okay, remember when I talked about spacecraft? Spacecraft are like vehicles that are that take astronauts from one place to another. For instance, if you want to take astronauts to the moon, they have to go into a spacecraft. Okay, if you want astronauts to orbit the Earth, they have to enter into a spacecraft. So think 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 spacecraft as a vehicle for moving astronaut or robotics or equipment. Okay, so here's the diagram of the chains of five. So that is how they started. So here is also the picture or the live picture of chains of five spacecraft. Okay, so inside these chains of five, Yang Li, who is the first Chinese astronaut, he entered Earth orbit, okay, and completed 14 orbits around Earth. 14, okay. When he was right inside it, there were a lot of testing. They tested the spacecraft system, they tested the communications with the mission control. After the testing, he returned safely back to Earth. So the mission lasted for about 21 hours, 23 minutes. So that was the first attempt of China going to space with an astronaut. So it started in 2003. I want you to take note of that because a lot of people think that China just started maybe in 2021. No, there have been ongoing programs, okay, tested programs. So after this phase one, they enter the phase two. So in the first two, they developed space laboratory. I mean Tiangong 1 and Tiangong 2. So they were just small laboratories uh, to master docking technologies and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk about these later. Okay. So but something unique happened in these first two. Okay. I'll talk about I'll talk about these two later. So there's an important question that might come into your mind, or maybe you are curious about, or maybe going on in the media. And the question is because if you look at the International Space Station, there are other countries, like multiple countries. We have America and Russia as the major collaborators, and then we have Europeans, you have Japanese, you have modules, you have Canada. Then you have a couple of these other countries that have also sent astronauts there. You have Saudi Arabia, you have I think Malaysia, you have South Africa, you have a couple of other countries that are not partners to the ISS that have sent astronauts to the ISS. And the question is, why why is China? Why is China in all of these? And the answer is that in 2007, China actually wanted to collaborate. They wanted to be partners, not just to send an astronaut there. They wanted to contribute their resources to the ISS program. But something happened. Okay, so when they sent the proposal, the Russian Space Agency Rosmos they agreed. The European Space Agency agreed to have Russia come. Sorry, have China join as partners. But the United States opposed to that. You're opposed to China joining them. In fact, they enacted a law in 2011 to prohibit China from joining in 2011. So that amendment is called the Wolf Amendment. It's a law that prohibits China. And the reason is because there were a lot of security concerns because, the Chinese space program is related, is linked to their military. Okay, so they are afraid that China is going to steal some of these technologies, you know, reverse engineer them and use them. So China have these habits of stealing technologies. So they do not want that. United States do not want that. So that is why China was not permitted. I want you to know that is why China wasn't permitted. Okay. So, however, as that was going on in 2011, uh, that same year that the Wolf Law was enacted, 2011, China launched their first space laboratory, space station, Tiangong 1, and in 2016 they launched Tiangong 2, and I said I'm going to explain them in more details. So, Tiangong 1 became China's first space station. It was launched in 2011 and it weighs about 8.5 tons. So this space station served as a prototype space station, and it was visited by several missions, like several astronauts, several crews visited it. So doing these missions, they tested a lot of things, they tested the technologies, they tested Rendersville's, the docking technologies, and after that, the spacecraft, was decommissioned in 2018. So, and that was it. So I want you to think of these first space station as an experiment, because if you want to build a house, think about this. If you want to build a house, okay, you call an architect to do a miniature design for you, okay? So that miniature design is a replica of the real house. Do you understand? So in space, this is how we do it in space. If you have a plan to launch something bigger, you have to start from small. You have to start from experimental components, okay? So for this, so you remember the first one they did was the phase one. They launched the spacecraft. The big data, they gathered data, and then they launched this Tiangong 1, which is a space laboratory. It stayed there from 2011 to 2018. Then it retired. Then they launched. In fact, even when Tiangong 1 was still in space, they launched the second, which is Tiangong 2, in 2016. They launched in 2016, which is an improved version of Tiangong 1. It hosted astronauts for longer days, and also they tested life support systems, scientific experiment. They performed scientific experiments. They tested refueling technologies, and in 2019 they retired it or deorbited. So, and that was China's second experimental space station. And now they have gathered information from the spacecraft, from the Tiangong 1, Tiangong 2, and now comes the phase 3, which is the permanent space station, which is which is Tiangong 3. Okay, so it was launched in 2001. Just a couple, I think 2001 is about 5 years, 4 to 5 years ago. Okay, that's the diagram of the Tiangong one. I want to talk about it later. So Tiangong Tiangong 3, okay, not Tiangong 1. I made a mistake, sorry. So Tiangong 3 has three main modules, okay? Unlike it is much smaller compared to the ISS that has 16, okay? The ISS has 16. I only talked about a few of them in my last lecture. So Tiangong has three main modules, okay? So we have the tie-in module, which is the core module. So it serves as the command center. So that's the diagram there. Command center. It serves as a living quarters for the astronaut. It serves as a control center for the astronaut, and a docking hub for incoming spacecraft. And also it serves as a quarter. It houses the quarter where astronauts sleep, eat, exercise, and work. So if you look at this diagram, so you can see this is the Italian model. That's the main module of the space station. Then we have the Wenqin laboratory module. Wenqin laboratory module. Okay, so it is used for biological experiments, life science experiments, space medicine experiments, and spacewalk support. Now we have the Machine laboratory module. It is used for physics experiment, material science, fluid dynamics, advanced technologies. So this is it. So if you look at these two, I mean the Machine and the Wenqin laboratory, you understand that this one is used for biological medicine, life science experiment, while this is used for physics, engineering experiments. So this is just amazing how they did it. So here is the diagram of the major station component. So I related to the colors. So here is the blue. So blue is the pressurized component accessible by the crew without using spacesuits. Okay, they're just gonna be like normal. Okay, just floating, but normal in the space station. They're not gonna wear spacesuits, but they are pressurized. That's they maintain the pressure. Measure oxygen. For the survival of the astronaut without needing the spacesuit. Then we have the green area, which is the docking port. It is pressurized only when a visiting spacecraft is present. So here is the location. Okay, those green labels. Then we have this one, which is the airlock to move people, astronauts, or materials between pressurized and unpressurized environments. So here, the cargo airlock. Here, EVA hatch, Zenith, EVA airlock. Then we have the um, like call it yellow. Okay, yellow, which is the unpressurized component, which contains the solar arrays and the core module, manipulator, robotic arms, and so on and so forth. This is the winch robotic arm. Okay, so this is the component. So here is the picture. So here's the picture. So you can see it has this is the solar arrays. This is the main module, and here is the other module. So here's the robotic arms. The robotic arms, um, just like we have it on the ISS. Okay, just at the main module. Then here is this is a spacecraft that either brought astronaut or brought a cargo. Okay, brought a cargo. And I told you something about the other purpose of this. It is used to boost the space station. Remember when I was talking about the altitude of the ISS, I told you that in as much that the atmosphere is thin at that altitude, okay, there is still some molecules of air, so that at high speed, they slow down the speed of the space station. Okay, so it makes so as they drag it down, the speed reduces, and so the altitude reduces. So what it does is that it boosted back. So let me just play this video so that I can remind you of what I was talking about. Yeah,
The space station is constantly falling, but it's moving forward so fast that as it falls, it keeps missing the planet. This continuous fall creates a loop, keeping it circling around Earth rather than crashing into it. But the space station isn't completely out of the atmosphere, which does contain a tiny bit of air. And as it loses speed moving forward, gravity starts to pull it a little closer to Earth each day, meaning it would eventually fall to the ground. To fix this, the station uses small rocket boosts every few weeks to climb back up, which keeps it in perfect orbit.
That's what rocket boost could be. These spacecraft. Okay, it is not permanent today. It's just an incoming spacecraft that brought astronaut or that brought supplies to the space station. So that is it. So some facts about the Tiangong 3. Some facts about Tiangong 3. altitude. I just talked about altitude right now. So the altitude at which, I mean, the height above ground level at which it orbits Earth is approximately between 340 to 450 kilometers. 340 to 450. So that's almost the same altitude range as the International Space Station. Okay, so and also I also said I told you that it is not just unique to this space station. It is not unique to the ISS and the Tiangong 3. All low Earth orbits, all low Earth satellites orbits at that altitude. Okay, or should I say all satellites placed at low Earth orbit are around this altitude range. So that is it. Then how about the inclination? Tiangong 3 orbits Earth with an inclination of 41.5 degrees relative to Earth equator. So look at that. So here is Earth equator. If you draw a straight line, and okay, so if you now make an angle of 41.5 degrees, so that's how it orbits Earth. Okay, okay, so although what is showing here is Tiangong 1, but it, the same angle was used for Tiangong 1, Tiangong 3, Tiangong 2, and then Tiangong 3. Okay. Now contrast that with the ISS, which orbits at an inclination of even, I mean, 51.6 degrees, even higher. Okay. So these inclinations are not just chosen at random; they are chosen for a specific reason. For instance, remember what I told you about the International Space Station? The inclination of 51.6 degree was chosen so that it allows the United States to send astronaut or payload to the ISS from Florida. That is where they sent satellite to space, okay? And also it allows Russia to send supplies to the ISS from their Baikonur uh, region. So this is the reason why those angles were chosen. They are not just chosen at random. So the same way, China chose this inclination mainly because of its latitude to the Jingwan region. That is where they launch satellites to. That is where they launch satellites to space. So it's called Jingwan Satellite Launch Center, which is at an latitude of 40.9 degrees north. So that is why they chose it, so that they can, when they launch, they can dock on the space station. So how about the mass? In terms of the mass, Tiangong 3 weighs 70,000 kilograms, about 70,000, or I said 70 tons. Okay, because 1 ton is 1,000 kilograms. Okay, while the ISS is 400 and 420,000 kilograms. So that is about 6 times. The ISS weighs 6 times more than the Tiangong 3. So they are incomparable. So if you compare, Tiangong 3 has just 3 models, while this one has 16 models. So it is even incomparable. So how about the size? So I'm going to be comparing the size with the ISS. In terms of the size, the length of ISS is just 73 meters, while that of Tiangong 3 is 55. The width of the ISS is 109, while Tiangong 3 is 39, and the height of the ISS is 20, while Tiangong 3 is 17. Okay, so you remember when I was comparing the size of the ISS with the American football, and I said they are the same. The American football is the same size as the ISS. Okay, so if you compare this length of 55 meters, you discover that it is half the size of the ISS. So, if it is half, if the Tiangong 3 is half the size of the ISS, it means that it is half the size of the American football. Okay, so if you've seen an American football, Okay, if you look at it, divide it into two, your imagination, half the size of that American football is the size of the Tiangong 3. Okay, so but something is happening here. Something strange is happening here. If you look at the width and the length of the ISS, discover that the width is longer than the length. Okay, and in mathematics, we always say the length is always greater than the width. So why is the mathematics not applying here? I'm going to explain why on dimension measurements of the ISS. The 73-meter length of the ISS refers roughly to the distance from one end of the pressurized model to the other, okay? While the 109-meter width includes the enormous solar arrays extending from both sides of the station's central true. So if you look at this diagram that I drew here, so from one solar array to the next solar array is what made the the 109-meter. Okay, why the real length is here. If you look at that diagram, so this is the real length. Okay, it does not. So this is the real length of the ISO, which is 73. Okay, so and the reason is the solar arrays are much longer than the pressurized module themselves. Okay, so you can think of it as an aircraft. Okay, if you think of as a passenger aircraft, most especially passenger aircraft, the wingspan is often greater than the length of the spacecraft. So look at this diagram. You can see that oh, the wingspan is greater. This is the wingspan. This is the length. Okay, if you measure it, it's usually greater. So, but when we talk about the length of an aircraft, we calculate it from here to here. We don't say here to here. So, even for the aircraft, you see that the width is greater than the length. Okay, so that is how I want you to think about ISS. So the reason why the width is greater than the length is because we are measuring it from the solar arrays. The width is measured from the solar array. So how about another fact which is deciding, just like the International Space Station, oh, just like the International Space Station, the Tiangong 3 can also be seen with the naked eyes as it passes overhead. Okay, so here's the picture that I used in my last lecture about the ISS. So this is the siding of the ISS. Okay, this is the siding of the ISS. But however, it is generally not as bright as the ISS. If you look at it, it's not as bright as the ISS. It's because it is much smaller. Okay, the solar panels, the solar panels, they reflect light, and that reflection is what we perceive as the size of the ISS. Okay, so it has fewer solar panels, so it doesn't reflect much light, and also its entire surface area is much smaller than the ISS, so it doesn't have enough surface area to reflect light. So that is why it is small. Okay, so if we compare it with all the bright objects in the night sky, okay, this is the object and the magnitude. So in the night sky, the brightest object is the moon, followed by Venus, followed by the International Space Station, followed by Tiangong 3, and then Sirius, which is the brightest star. So if you can see Sirius, the brightest star, it means you can see Tiangong 3, and with your naked eyes, okay? So we can pretty much see it. So I want you to try to track the Tiangong 3 from using any of these mobile apps. You can easily track it. So in terms of speed, the Tiangong 3 orbits Earth at at a speed of about 28,000 kilometers per hour, or Mach 22.7. I remember I also stated this for the International Space Station. The reason remains that they are orbiting. If you look at the orbital mechanics, the formulas, okay, any object that is at the same height orbit at the same speed. So it orbits at the same speed um, as the ISS. So in terms of its complete orbits, the Tiangong 3 completes, uh, it orbits Earth once every 90 minutes, just like the ISS. So in one Earth day, which is 24 hours, it completes about 16 orbits, about 16 orbits. So that means that astronauts on Tiangong 3 experience 16 sunrise and sunsets every day. So taikonauts. Who are taikonauts? Taikonauts are the English name given to Chinese space astronauts. Okay, so taikonauts are Chinese astronauts. So take note of that. So just like the what is done with the ISS, there is an educational program where Chinese students can connect to taikonauts and interact with them. We have a question and answer session with them. So here is just a picture of describing it. Okay, so this happens with the Chinese space station. So in the future, they have plans to accommodate the rest of the world, like ARIS. ARIS is the amateur radio on International Space Station, where students connect to astronauts via radio, no video. Okay, so China also hopes to have that on the Tiangong 3 to encompass the world. Okay, to encompass the world. So, but for this video session, it's only going to be meant for Chinese students. So how about scientific experiment going on the ice on the Tiangong 3? So the Chinese space station studies the sun and space weather. They study Earth from space, from the Tiangong 3, of course. They study the human body. They study the behavior of matter in microgravity. They study the behavior of plants and living organisms on microgravity. They study the universe. They also test future space technologies. In fact, in 2027, they plan to launch a telescope. That telescope is going to be orbiting very close to Tiangong 3. And over time, maybe when it requires maintenance, it's going to dock at the port. There's a port reserved for it. Okay, it's going to dock at the port for maintenance after it goes back in orbit. So it is just a real astronomy telescope for astronomy research. So they plan to do that in 2027. So they are testing all kinds of futuristic technologies on studying the universe with this telescope. So how about the interior of Tiangong 3? It looks so beautiful and looks so spacious, and also, I mean, look at that, look at that, look at the corridor, look at how beautiful it is. The ISS isn't like it. The ISS is just like I don't know how to put it. I don't think they actually have a special space for where astronauts live, but I mean, for the ISS, but for the Chinese space station, which is the Tiangong 3, there's a special area for the taikonauts. Sorry, taikonaut. Okay, they have for laboratories, scientific laboratories. Okay, just like the ISS has some scientific laboratories. They have exercise rooms, equipment, and also storage areas. This picture was released in 2001 when the Tiangong 3 was commissioned, and it shook the world because it shows how clean the Tiangong 3 space station is and how dirty the ISS is. And my simple response to this is you cannot compare a 30-year-old to a young baby. Okay? Okay. ISS has been there since 1998 and it has been through different challenges. So it is not possible to compare them. Okay? So let's just watch maybe in the next couple of years, 10 years, 15 years. Let's see what happens to the Chinese space station, okay? So, but it really, really caused uproar on the internet. So, for the future expansion of Tiangong 3, in the future, China plans to expand Tiangong 3 from the current model it has. It has 3 models to 6 models. Okay, that's the future plan. 6 models. They want to increase it, just like ISS. ISS started with 1 or 2 models in 1998 to 2000, and over time the models grew to 16, and in 2011 it was completed. Okay, so they plan to increase it in the future to 6 models, and that will increase the mass from 70 tons to 180 tons, and it's also going to make the surface, it's going to make it brighter so that we can also see it just like we see the ISS. So they're going to be installing new core modules and docking hub, okay, allowing additional modules and spacecraft to connect to the station. The expanded station is expected to operate for at least 15 years and support a large scientific research program. And new capabilities could include 3D printing technologies, advanced robotics, robotic arms, and robots, not just the arms, robots, improved robotic arms too, and space debris monitoring systems, and etc. So here's a diagram of the future Tiangong 3. They plan to expand it from what it is currently. So increase the solar arrays, increase the power, okay? So now, how about international cooperation and why Tiangong 3 matters? China has opened Tiangong 3 to international scientific research with experiments from more than a dozen countries approved for operation aboard the station. China and Pakistan has agreed to send a Pakistani astronaut to the Tiangong 3 station, so marking a major step towards international crew participation. So, and also as the ISS approaches retirement, Tiangong 3 could serve as an important alternative platform for human space research and international cooperation in low Earth orbit. So that is the end of my lecture, but I want to play a short video to summarize everything I've talked about the Tiangong 3. So just watch it. Thank you so much.
Tens of thousands of satellites and spacecraft are now orbiting some 400 kilometers above Earth's surface. Among them is a large manned spacecraft that might catch your eye. It's the Tiangong China Space Station. The Tiangong orbits the Earth at a speed about 7.8 kilometers per second. It takes about 90 minutes to complete one full orbit. Taikonauts can even see 16 sunrises a day from the station. This brand new China National Space Laboratory mainly consists of the Tianhe Core Module, Wentian and Mengtian Lab modules, which together form the iconic T-shaped structure. Together with the Shenzhou manned spacecraft and Tianzhou cargo ship, the whole space station weighs almost 100 tons. So how was this state-of-the-art space station put together? Let's check it out. Starting with the launch of the Tianhe Core Module in April 2021, China has planned 11 missions to complete the construction of the space station, including 3 major modules, 4 Shenzhou spacecraft, and 4 Tianzhou cargo ships. So at this site, and having floated through space for so long, how is the Tiangong maintaining power? The answer to that comes down to these 2 pairs of flexible solar arrays, which generate 80% of the entire space station's electricity. They have special heat-driving devices, wrist-like bearing units, to help rotate these 2 solar arrays 360 degrees to face the sunlight in unblocked positions. Each pair has a total length of around 55 meters. Space engineers say these 4 big solar winds generate nearly 1,000 kilowatt-hour of electricity per day, which is equivalent to the electricity consumption of an ordinary family for nearly half a year. By the way, the thing crawling outside the Tiangong Space Station right now is a robotic arm. It has 7 adjustable levels, just as flexible as a human's arm. Now, taikonauts can stand on the robotic arm and move around quickly. This enables them to be a lot more efficient during the installation work or maintenance tasks. Alright, let's take a look inside the space station now. Coming in, you can see how bright and spacious this place is. It's a large space of 110 cubic meters with so many rooms, so don't get lost. This is the Tianhe core module, the main living space for astronauts. There are 3 different sleeping areas where you can lie down and sleep. Actually, there are another 3 sleeping areas in Wentian Lab module, which will support up to 6 taikonauts on board. There are over 120 kinds of food here, so taikonauts will have a different menu every day. Alright, dinner is over, time for exercise. We have a running machine or a bicycle, the choice is yours. Scientists developed a special recycling system to support life in space. The system can collect moisture, volatilized water, and carbon dioxide released by the taikonauts. Even the urine is processed. All of that is done through subsystems such as electrolytic oxygen production, drinking water collection and treatment, urine treatment, and carbon dioxide and harmful gas removal. Can you imagine? Within just a year, the system has recycled over 2,600 kilograms of water. That's a sufficient amount of water for a person to drink over a span of 2 years. Now we can't forget our daily necessities, the internet. On China Space Station, taikonauts can now use a mobile app to control the lights. Just like this. And inquire about the storage and supply of the materials. And if you miss your family or friends back on Earth, you can make phone calls, chat through video calls, send and receive emails. Now let's take a closer look at the lab modules. The Wentian Lab is mainly for the scientific research of life in space, including the growth and development of different types of plants, animals, and microorganisms. For example, here is a key experimental cabinet called Universal Biological Cultivation Module, where the rice and Arabidopsis are planted. In fact, Chinese taikonauts and students on the ground carried out an experiment in which the same seed was planted. The seeds grow under different gravity conditions, enabling them to study the mechanisms of growth. The Mengtian is mainly for the scientific research of microgravity. In addition to the 13 cabinets inside Mengtian, there are also 37 payload positions outside the cabin. There is a special piece of equipment in the Mengtian Lab module for releasing micro spacecraft. With the help of astronauts, the payload transfer tool, and the robotic arm, the equipment will eject small satellites weighing about 100 kilograms into orbit, just like a slingshot. So now you've seen everything from the outside to the inside. 9 international experimental projects selected from 17 countries and regions will be sent to the Tiangong later. In the future, overseas friends, astronauts, and scientists are all welcome to work and live in China's space station. The starry sky is vast and bright. Chinese and foreign scientists will join together to explore more possibilities of the vast universe on the big platform known as the Tiangong.